Get her off my land!
For a crime no one saw me commit?
You forget your place.
No! You decided I never had one.
What is your name?
Cassandra.
Your family name?
People like you made certain I never had one. Wait.
Why?
Do you want to watch more closely?
Why aren't you afraid of me?
Because monsters only have power when we look away.
My cousin discarded you. I could give you shelter.
At what price?
Whatever price I decide.
Then I would rather freeze.
The silver was found in Lord Cassian's chambers. Then Cassandra was innocent.
How long has she been outside?
Come to throw me out twice?
You were innocent. I told you that. Cassandra, the man who framed you, is hunting you now.
The candle guttered as the guards dragged her across the frozen courtyard, mud soaking through her thin gown, while the Duke watched from the palace steps with eyes like winter itself. "Get this nameless wretch off my land," he had commanded, yet something in her defiant gaze made his heart stop mid-order. He did not know her name. He did not know her blood. He only knew that casting her out felt, impossibly, like tearing something from his own chest. Welcome back to the Royal Duke Diaries. Settle in, because tonight's story will break your heart before it heals it. Subscribe, and let's begin. The rain had not stopped for 3 days when Cassandra Vance was dragged from the servants' quarters of Ravencliff Estate and thrown into the mud like refuse. She stole from the household, the steward had declared, though no one had actually seen her take anything. It didn't matter. In the eyes of the Duke of Ravencliff, accusations against a nameless orphan required no proof. Cassandra knelt in the freezing courtyard, her dark hair plastered to her face, her hands raw from scrubbing floors since she was 12 years old. She had no family name, no parents, no one to speak for her. She was simply the girl from the orphanage, taken in by the estate out of charity 7 years ago, and now discarded the same way. She lifted her chin anyway. Whatever they thought of her, she would not crawl. Above her on the marble steps of the great house stood Duke Alaric Draven, tall, severe, his black coat sharp against the gray sky, his expression carved from stone. He was the most feared man in the 3 counties. Men trembled at his name. Women were warned against his gaze. He had buried a father, a mother, and, the rumors whispered, a fiancée who vanished under circumstances no one dared discuss. "Remove her from the grounds," he said, voice flat, final. But as the guards seized her arms, Cassandra looked up, straight into his eyes, and something happened that the Duke would spend the rest of his life trying to forget. She did not look away. She did not beg. She looked at him the way no servant, no noble, no soul in his kingdom had dared look at him in years, as though she saw the man beneath the title and was not afraid of either. Alaric's jaw tightened. "Wait," he said. The guards froze. He descended the steps slowly, each footfall echoing across the silent courtyard, until he stood over her, rain darkening his shoulders. Up close, she was younger than he expected, fierce. Beautiful in a way that unsettled him. Not delicate, not fragile, but strong in the way storms are strong. "What is your name?" he asked. "Cassandra," she said. "Just Cassandra. No family name? None that was ever given to me, your grace." Something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or the ghost of a memory he couldn't place. He studied her face a moment too long. Then, as if catching himself in a weakness he could not afford, he straightened. "Take her to the gates," he said again, quieter this time. "But see that she is fed first." It was the smallest mercy. It would change everything. The next morning, Cassandra found herself standing outside the estate walls with nothing but a satchel of bread and the clothes on her back. The village of Hallowmere lay 2 miles down the muddy road, and she had nowhere else to go. She had worked at Ravencliff since she was 12. It was the only home she had ever known, however unkind it had been. Now, at 19, she was simply nothing. No name, no place, no future. She began walking. She did not get far before a carriage. Black, crested with the Draven family sigil, a raven clutching a crown, slowed beside her on the road. The window lowered. It was not the Duke. It was his younger cousin, Lord Cassian Vale. A golden-haired man with a lazy smile and eyes that lingered too long on things that weren't his. "Well," Cassian said, leaning out. "The infamous orphan girl my cousin threw to the wolves. Rumor spreads fast in this house. I have no interest in your amusement, my lord, Cassandra said, continuing to walk. No? Cassian's smile widened. You should. I could offer you shelter, work, perhaps something more, if you're clever about it. She stopped walking and turned to face him fully, her spine straight despite the mud on her hem. I would rather sleep in a ditch. Cassian laughed, delighted rather than offended. Careful, little bird. Ravencliff is not a kind place to those who refuse kindness. The carriage rolled on, but Cassian's gaze lingered on her through the rear window until the road curved away, and something about the way he looked at her, hungry and calculating, made her skin crawl in a way the Duke's stare never had. That evening, back at the estate, Duke Alaric stood in his study staring at a portrait he kept locked behind a velvet curtain. A woman with dark hair and defiant eyes, painted 20 years ago. His mother had commissioned it before she disappeared from court entirely, before the scandal that no one in the kingdom was permitted to speak of. He had not looked at that painting in years. Tonight, for reasons he could not explain, he could not stop. You sent the girl away, came a voice from the doorway. His steward, Bertram, stood there with a ledger in hand. The orphan, Cassandra. I did what was necessary. Forgive me, your grace, but nothing was stolen. The missing silver was found in Lord Cassian's chambers this afternoon. Alaric's head snapped up. What? It seems your cousin borrowed it and forgot to mention it. The girl was innocent. Something cold and furious settled in Alaric's chest. Not at the theft, but at himself. He had cast an innocent girl into the storm on his cousin's word, without proof, without mercy, exactly the way his own father had once cast someone else out of this house. He stood so fast his chair scraped against the floor. Ready my horse. Your grace, it's nearly dark. Now, Bertram. He found her 3 miles down the road, soaked to the bone, sitting beneath a dying oak tree with her satchel clutched to her chest, like the only thing left in the world worth protecting. She looked up when his horse approached, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Come to finish throwing me out, your grace, she asked, voice hoarse from cold, but still sharp enough to cut. You were innocent, he said. The silver was found in my cousin's rooms. I know. Her eyes flashed. I told your steward that this morning. No one listened, because I have no name to make them listen. Shame, an emotion Alaric Draven rarely allowed himself to feel, burned through him. He dismounted, closing the distance between them, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he did something he never did. He apologized. I was wrong, he said. Come back to Ravencliff. You will be treated properly. I swear it. Cassandra studied him for a long moment, rain dripping from her lashes. Why should I trust the word of a man who threw me into the mud without a second thought? Because, Alaric said quietly, I am asking you to give me the chance to be a different man than the one who did that. Something in his voice, raw, unguarded, nothing like the Duke the world feared, made her breath catch. She did not know why she said yes, but she did. The following weeks unfolded like a slow, careful thaw. Alaric insisted she be given proper rooms in the eastern wing, away from the servants' quarters, though he told no one why. He insisted she take meals with dignity, that she be taught to read properly, that the household treat her not as charity, but as a guest whose worth he would not explain even to himself. The staff whispered. Cassian smirked knowingly at every dinner, but Cassandra said nothing, and Alaric offered no explanations, because he did not have one that made sense. Only the undeniable truth that something about her unsettled the careful stillness he had built around his heart since the day his mother vanished. One evening, in the library, he found her curled in a window seat with one of his mother's old books, the candlelight catching the fierce concentration on her face. You read faster than half the scholars I've employed, he said, leaning against the doorway. She startled, closing the book. Forgive me, I shouldn't have. No. He crossed the room, something almost gentle in his expression. Read whatever you like. This library has been gathering dust for years. It deserves someone who actually wants it. Their eyes met, and the air between them thickened in a way neither of them acknowledged aloud. Why did you really come back for me that night? Cassandra asked softly. Alaric was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, he admitted. I only knew that letting you walk away felt like losing something I hadn't yet found. The words hung between them, dangerous and honest. Cassian noticed the shift immediately. The way his cousin's eyes followed the orphan girl across every room, the way his voice softened only for her. It infuriated him. At the harvest ball 3 weeks later, held in the grand hall of Ravencliff, with nobles from every neighboring estate in attendance, Cassian made his move. He found Cassandra standing alone near the terrace doors, dressed in a borrowed gown of deep emerald that Alaric had quietly commissioned for her without telling anyone why. "You look radiant tonight," Cassian said, offering his arm. "Dance with me." "I would rather not, my lord." "Come now." His grip closed around her wrist, firmer than propriety allowed. "You owe me for that ride on the road, at least." "Let go of her." Alaric's voice cut across the terrace like a blade. He had crossed the hall in seconds, his expression darker than the storm clouds gathering outside. Cassian released her, smiling lazily. "Just being neighborly, cousin." "Touch her again," Alaric said, low and lethal, "and I will forget you are family." The threat silenced every conversation within earshot. Nobles stared. Cassian's smile faltered for the first time all evening. When the crowd resumed its chatter, Alaric turned to Cassandra, his jaw still tight with fury, his hand hovering near her waist as if to steady her. Or perhaps himself. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am now," she whispered. For a long, breathless moment, neither of them moved. The music swelled around them, and Alaric, Duke of Ravencliff, feared by every soul in the kingdom, found himself utterly undone by a girl with no name and eyes that saw straight through him. "Dance with me instead," he said quietly. She placed her hand in his. That night, after the ball had ended and the guests had gone, Alaric walked Cassandra back to her chambers through the moonlit corridors of the estate. Neither spoke. The silence between them was not empty. It was full, charged, trembling with everything neither dared say. At her door she turned to face him. "Thank you," she said softly, "for tonight, for all of it. Cassandra." Her name in his mouth sounded different than anyone else's. Reverent, careful, as though he were afraid to break it. "I need you to know something." "What?" He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him despite the cold corridor, close enough that her heart forgot how to beat properly. "I have spent my whole life being told that a Draven does not need anyone," he said. "That love is a weakness men like me cannot afford." His hand rose, hesitant, to brush a strand of hair from her face. "And then you arrived in my courtyard, soaked and furious and utterly unafraid of me, and I have not had a single peaceful thought since." Her breath caught. "Your Grace, Alaric," he corrected softly. "Just Alaric, when it is only us." She looked up at him, and for the first time since the night he cast her into the mud, Cassandra let herself hope. He did not kiss her. Not yet. But his forehead dropped gently to hers, and they stood there in the moonlight. Two people who had both been discarded by the world in different ways, finding something neither had expected to find again. But not everyone at Ravencliff wished to see the Duke happy. In a locked chamber deep in the West Wing, Cassian Vale sat before a fire, a letter clutched in his hand, one that had arrived that very morning from the capital, sealed with the royal insignia of the crown itself. His smile was cold as he read it a second time. The letter spoke of a missing princess, lost 20 years ago in a scandal the crown had buried, a royal infant, stolen from the palace nursery the night the old queen vanished, never to be found. A birthmark, shaped like a crescent moon, just below the left shoulder, was the only way to identify her. Cassian had seen that very mark 2 nights ago, when Cassandra's gown had slipped during the ball, exposing the pale curve of her shoulder before she quickly adjusted it. He folded the letter slowly, his mind already spinning with possibility, with leverage, with power he had never imagined within his reach. "Well, well," he murmured into the firelight. "Little bird, it seems you are not so nameless after all." The next morning, storm clouds gathered thick and dark over Ravencliff, as though the sky itself sensed the truth about to break loose upon the estate. A truth that would tear apart everything Alaric and Cassandra had only just begun to build, and reveal a secret the crown had buried for 20 long years. Cassandra had no idea, as she dressed for breakfast that morning, that her entire world was about to change. She only knew that for the first time in her life, someone had looked at her not as a nameless orphan to be discarded, but as someone worth protecting, worth fighting for. What she did not yet know was how far Duke Alaric Draven would go to keep her, or how much the truth of her birth would cost them both. The rain returned that afternoon, hammering against the windows of Ravencliff as Cassandra sat in the library, unaware that her entire fate had already been decided by a man with cold eyes and a folded letter. Cassian did not act immediately. He was patient the way vultures are patient, circling until the moment was right. He waited 3 days. On the third evening, he requested a private audience with Duke Alaric in the study, claiming urgent family business. Alaric, distracted by thoughts of Cassandra that he could no longer ignore, agreed without suspicion. "You look troubled, cousin," Cassian said, settling into the chair across from the desk, swirling brandy he had not been offered. "Tell me, how serious has this attachment to the orphan girl become?" Alaric's expression hardened. "That is not your concern." "Oh, but it is." Cassian's smile was slow, cruel. "Because the girl you've been parading around this estate, the one you nearly struck me for touching, is not who you think she is. Choose your next words carefully." Cassian slid the letter across the desk. "Read it yourself." Alaric's hands were steady as he unfolded the parchment, but his breath was not. He read the royal seal first. Then the words. A missing princess. A birthmark shaped like a crescent moon. A queen who vanished 20 years ago under a scandal the crown had silenced with threats and gold. "This is absurd," Alaric said, though something cold was already spreading through his chest. "Is it?" Cassian leaned forward. "I saw the mark myself, cousin. Left shoulder. Exactly as described. Your little orphan is not nameless at all. She is the lost daughter of Queen Isolde, heir to a throne that has sat empty for 2 decades. Alaric's jaw tightened. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," Cassian said, standing, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve, "I intend to be the one who returns her to the crown. Do you understand what reward the royal house would offer the man who solves a 20-year mystery? Titles, land, a place at court beyond anything a second son could dream of. You would sell her like cattle." "I would elevate her," Cassian corrected coldly. "Something you, apparently, only wish to keep hidden in your library like a pet." Alaric rose so fast the chair crashed backward. "Get out of my house." "I already sent word to the capital this morning," Cassian said calmly, walking toward the door. "The royal guard will arrive within the week to verify her identity. There is nothing you can do to stop it now, cousin. Perhaps you should have thought of that before you fell in love with a queen's daughter and thought no one would notice." The door closed behind him, and Alaric stood alone in the firelight, the letter trembling in his hand, understanding with sudden, sickening clarity that everything was about to change, and that he had absolutely no power to stop it. He did not tell her that night, or the next. He told himself he was protecting her from panic, from fear, from a truth too enormous to carry. In reality, he was afraid that the moment Cassandra learned who she truly was, the girl who looked at him without flinching, who saw him as a man rather than a title, would vanish into a world of crowns and thrones where a duke's love meant nothing at all. But Cassandra noticed the change in him immediately. The way his eyes grew distant, the way he stopped meeting her gaze at dinner, the way he began avoiding the library where they had spent so many quiet evenings together. "You are hiding something from me," she said one evening, finding him alone on the eastern balcony, staring out at the storm-darkened hills. "Cassandra, don't." Her voice cracked, though she kept her chin lifted, proud even in her hurt. "I have spent my entire life being lied to, being discarded, being told half-truths by people who decided I didn't deserve the whole of anything. I thought you were different. I am trying to protect you." "From what?" He turned to face her, and for the first time since the night in the mud, she saw real fear in the Duke's eyes. Not for himself, but for her. "From a truth that may take you from me forever," he said quietly. He told her everything that night. The letter, the birthmark, the vanished queen, Cassian's plan to deliver her to the crown like a prize to be claimed. Cassandra listened in silence, her hand instinctively rising to her left shoulder, to the small crescent-shaped mark she had carried her entire life and never once questioned. "It cannot be true," she whispered. "I am no one. I have always been no one." "You were never no one," Alaric said fiercely, crossing the balcony to take her hands in his. "Whatever the letter says, whoever you turn out to be, princess or orphan, it changes nothing about what I feel for you. How can you say that? If I truly am, because I fell in love with the girl who looked me in the eye in the mud and refused to break," he said, his voice raw. "Not a crown, not a bloodline. You." The word love hung in the storm-heavy air between them, spoken for the first time, trembling and true. Cassandra's eyes filled with tears. Alaric, he did not let her finish. He closed the distance between them and kissed her. Finally, fully, the way he had wanted to since the night in the moonlit corridor. It was not gentle at first, it was desperate, months of restraint breaking apart at once, his hands framing her face as though she might disappear if he let go. When they finally parted, breathless, foreheads pressed together, rain beginning to fall softly around them. Cassandra whispered against his lips, "Whatever happens, whoever I am, I choose you. I have always chosen you." That night, beneath the storm, in the quiet privacy of the eastern wing, they let the world outside fall away entirely. What passed between them was not spoken of afterward, only felt in the way Alaric held her through the night, as if the crown itself might try to steal her from his arms before dawn, and in the way Cassandra finally, for the first time in her life, felt as though she belonged somewhere. But dawn brought no mercy. The royal carriage arrived 4 days later, exactly as Cassian had promised, flanked by armed guards in the crimson and gold of the crown. At its head rode a stern-faced envoy bearing the seal of the royal court, and behind him, an older woman wrapped in furs whose face, when she stepped down from the carriage and saw Cassandra standing on the estate steps, went utterly white. "Isolde," the woman breathed. Not a question, but a name spoken like a prayer answered after 20 years of silence. "You have her eyes. You have her exact eyes." The woman was Lady Wren, once handmaiden to the vanished Queen Isolde, the only person alive who might confirm the truth beyond a birthmark. She approached with trembling hands and gently, achingly, drew back the collar of Cassandra's gown to reveal the crescent mark on her shoulder. Tears spilled down the old woman's face. "It is her," Lady Wren whispered. "The lost princess, alive after all this time." The courtyard fell utterly silent. Cassian, standing smugly near the gates, could not hide his triumphant smile. Alaric stood beside Cassandra, his hand finding hers despite the guards watching, despite the impossible weight of what was happening. "What does this mean?" Cassandra asked, her voice shaking. "What happens now?" The envoy stepped forward, formal and cold. "It means, Your Highness, that you are to return to the capital immediately. The kingdom has been without an heir for 20 years. Your presence is required at court, effective at once." "And if I refuse?" The envoy's expression did not change. "The crown does not offer that choice." Alaric's grip on her hand tightened. "She is not cargo to be transported at your convenience." "With respect, Your Grace," the envoy said coldly. "She is the daughter of a queen, and matters of the crown are no longer within your jurisdiction." Cassandra looked at Alaric, really looked at him, memorizing every line of his face as though she feared she might never see it again, and felt her heart breaking in her chest. "I have to go," she whispered. "I know," he said, and his voice broke with words. She left that afternoon, the black and gold carriage rolling away down the muddy road, while Alaric stood frozen on the estate steps, watching the only person who had ever truly seen him disappear into the mist, exactly as his mother had vanished 20 years before. Cassian approached him afterward, insufferably pleased. "You should thank me, cousin. I've made you a footnote in royal history. The Duke who briefly housed a lost princess." Alaric turned on him with such violence in his eyes that Cassian actually stepped back. "Get off my land," Alaric said, voice deadly quiet, "before I forget every rule of civility I have ever observed." Cassian left. Alaric did not watch him go. He was already staring down the empty road, already planning, already refusing. Utterly, completely refusing to let this be the end. The weeks that followed at the royal capital were a blur of unfamiliar rooms, unfamiliar faces, and a crown Cassandra had never asked for and did not want. She was given a new name, Princess Isadora, after the mother she had never known, who it turned out had not vanished by choice, but had been forced into hiding by political enemies who sought to eliminate the royal bloodline entirely, dying in exile when Cassandra was only 3. Leaving her daughter smuggled away for safety and eventually, through a chain of tragic circumstances, placed in an orphanage under a false name. She was fitted for gowns she did not choose, taught etiquette she did not want, surrounded by nobles who smiled at her with the same calculating hunger Cassian once had. All of them suddenly became very interested in the favor of a princess who controlled a throne. She thought of Alaric every single night. She wrote him letters she never sent, afraid the crown's spies might intercept them, afraid that any weakness shown now might be used against them both. Meanwhile, back at Ravencliff, Alaric was not idle. He called in every favor owed to the Draven name across 2 decades. He petitioned the royal court directly, demanding an audience. He uncovered, through careful and relentless investigation, the truth behind Queen Isolde's disappearance. Evidence that the very political enemies who had driven her into hiding 20 years ago were still embedded within the royal council, men who had every reason to want the lost princess controlled, married off to their advantage, or quietly eliminated before she could reclaim what was rightfully hers. Men like Lord Harwin Castellan, head of the Royal Council, who had orchestrated the Queen's downfall 2 decades prior, and now stood to lose everything if the true princess ever sat the throne with independent will and unwelcome memory of who had betrayed her mother. Alaric brought this evidence to the capital himself, riding through the night, arriving at the palace gates disheveled, exhausted, and utterly unwilling to be turned away. "You cannot simply demand entrance to the royal palace," the guard captain informed him at the gates. "I have evidence of treason against the crown," Alaric said, holding up the sealed documents. "Evidence that the man currently advising Princess Isidora orchestrated her mother's exile and likely intends the same fate for her should she prove inconvenient to his ambitions. I suggest you let me pass." Whether it was the authority in his voice or the desperation in his eyes, the guard captain hesitated only a moment before waving him through. He found Cassandra, Isidora, now, though he refused to think of her by any name but the one she'd given him herself in the rain, in the palace gardens, sitting alone beneath a flowering tree, looking every bit the lonely girl he had first met in the mud, despite the crown-woven circlet now resting in her dark hair. "Alaric?" She rose so quickly she nearly stumbled. What are you doing here? If they see you, let them see me," he said, closing the distance between them in long, urgent strides. "I have spent 3 weeks tearing apart every secret this palace has buried, and I am done pretending I can simply let you go. Alaric, it's dangerous. Lord Castellan has eyes everywhere. I know." He reached into his coat and produced the documents. "Which is why I brought proof. He orchestrated your mother's downfall 20 years ago. He is the reason she died in exile. He is the reason you grew up with no name, no family, nothing but a birthmark to prove who you truly were. And I believe, given the chance, he intends to control you the same way. Through fear, through isolation, through a marriage to some ally of his choosing that will keep the throne exactly where he wants it." Cassandra, Isidora, stared at the documents in his hands, her breath shaking. "You risked everything to bring me this. I would risk considerably more," he said, "for you." Before she could respond, footsteps approached rapidly through the garden path. Lord Castellan himself appeared, flanked by 2 guards, his composed expression flickering with something colder the moment he saw the documents in Alaric's hand. "Duke Draven," Castellan said smoothly. "This is a restricted area. I must insist you leave immediately." "I think not," Alaric said, holding up the papers. "Not until Her Highness has seen exactly what you did to her mother, and exactly what you have been planning for her." Castellan's mask slipped for the briefest instant, pure, cold fury, before it settled back into false calm. "Guards, escort the Duke from the premises. Wait." Isidora's voice rang out across the garden, sharp and commanding in a way that silenced everyone present, the voice perhaps of a queen who had been waiting 20 years to be born. "No one moves. I want to hear what these papers say." Castellan's composure cracked further. "Your Highness, this is a fabrication designed to manipulate, then you will have no objection," Isidora said coldly, "to explain in front of the full council exactly why Duke Draven's investigation traces your private correspondence to the mercenaries who drove my mother from this palace 20 years ago." The silence that followed was absolute. The scandal that erupted over the following days shook the kingdom to its foundations. Lord Castellan's treason, the orchestrated exile of Queen Isolde, the falsified records, the 2 decades of quiet manipulation designed to keep the throne weak and pliable under his influence, was laid bare before the full royal council, thanks to the evidence Alaric had risked his life and reputation to gather. Castellan was stripped of his titles and imprisoned within the week. The council, shaken but grateful, formally recognized Isidora as the rightful heir to the throne, her claim beyond dispute. But amid the political chaos, one truth remained unshaken. The Duke of Ravencliff had ridden into the heart of enemy territory, alone, for a girl the world had once called Nameless. That evening, as the palace settled into uneasy quiet after the day's revelations, Isidora found Alaric standing alone on the same balcony where they had first spoken of love, weeks and a lifetime ago. "You could have been killed," she said softly, coming to stand beside him. "Castellan had men everywhere. If your evidence had been wrong, if he had moved against you first, I know. Why would you risk that, for a woman the whole kingdom now calls your highness, who owes you nothing?" Alaric turned to face her fully, and in his eyes she saw exactly what she had seen that first rainy night in the courtyard. Not a duke, not a title, but a man utterly, helplessly hers. "Because you never owed me anything," he said. "I loved a nameless orphan girl who looked at me without fear when the entire world called me a monster. Whether you are a princess or a servant girl changes nothing about that truth. I did not fall in love with your bloodline, Isadora. I fell in love with you." Tears filled her eyes. "The council will expect me to marry for political alliance. A prince, a foreign lord, someone who strengthens the throne." "Then let them expect it," Alaric said, closing the distance between them, taking her face gently in his hands. "I did not survive Castellan's men, did not tear apart 20 years of buried secrets, did not ride through the night on nothing but stubborn hope, to lose you now to a council's convenience. Alaric, marry me," he said, the words raw and unguarded, nothing like the cold duke the kingdom feared. "Not because it strengthens your throne, not because it pleases your council. Marry me because I love you more than I have ever loved anything in this world, and because I refuse to spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been if I had let you walk away in the rain that first night." Isadora, Cassandra, still, in the quiet moments that belonged only to them, laughed through her tears, the sound breaking free like sunlight after a long, long storm. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Alaric, 1,000 times yes." He kissed her then, beneath the same moon that had witnessed their first confession weeks before, and this time there was no fear in it, no uncertainty, only the quiet, absolute certainty of two people who had found their way back to each other against every possible odds. The wedding took place at Ravencliff, not the palace, at Isadora's insistence, because it was there, in the mud of that courtyard, that everything had truly begun. The council grumbled about propriety and political alliance, but the newly crowned Queen Isadora, it turned out, possessed her mother's steel beneath her gentle exterior and made it very clear that her heart, like her throne, was no longer anyone's to bargain with but her own. Cassian was quietly stripped of his position within the estate and sent to manage a distant, unremarkable property, his ambitions permanently curtailed. He was not invited to the wedding. Alaric stood at the altar in the same courtyard where he had once cast Cassandra into the storm, watching her walk toward him in a gown of ivory and gold, a crown resting delicately in her dark hair, her eyes finding his the exact same way they had that very first rainy morning. Fierce, unafraid, entirely certain. "I once told you to get off my land," he murmured as she reached him, a smile breaking through the solemnity of the moment. "And I once told you I'd rather sleep in a ditch than accept your cousin's help," she whispered back. "We've both learned better since." They were married beneath a sky finally clear of storms, the kingdom's lost princess, and the duke once feared by all, now bound together not by crown or title, but by a love that had survived mud, scandal, betrayal, and every obstacle a cruel world had thrown between them. 9 months later, the bells of Ravencliff rang out once more, this time for the birth of their daughter, a girl born with her mother's fierce dark eyes and, just below her left shoulder, the faint, unmistakable curve of a crescent moon. Alaric held his daughter that first night as the storm outside finally gave way to clear stars, Isadora resting beside him, and thought of the girl he had once thrown into the mud without a second glance, and how the greatest mercy of his entire life had been the moment he turned back for her. Some loves begin in cruelty and rain, but the truest ones, he had learned, are the ones brave enough to walk back through the storm and claim what almost slipped away. If Cassandra and Alaric's journey through storm, scandal, and stolen crowns touched your heart tonight, let us know in the comments which moment made you gasp the loudest. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more forbidden royal romances, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next tale of dukes, duchesses, and the love that defies every crown. Until next time, dear friends, sweet dreams, and may your own story find its happy ending. This has been the Royal Duke Diaries.